The Rest is Politics is powered by our friends at Fuse Energy.
And Fuse is a green electricity supplier, which means they generate all their energy from renewables. And they're actually offering a new bundle for anyone who switches to Fuse. And included in this, you'll be pleased to hear, is some merch. Alastair's hoodie, baseball caps, mugs. The Rest is Politics merch you may have seen on tour.
And all you got to do to get it is go to getfuse.com/politics and use the referral code politics. And so the merch is great, but more important is actually that if you do switch to Fuse, you're going to find you get your energy cheaper than with all the other big companies.
And they invest 100% of their profits back into renewables. They also now offer 24/7 support, which you can access through the Fuse app.
So dead easy, getfuse.com/politics, referral code politics, find out how to get your merch, how to switch to Fuse, and how to save yourself money. Welcome to the Rest is Politics Question Time with me, Alastair Campbell.
And with me, Rory Stewart.
What about this one? Poppy, which is worse, Hunter Biden or Charles Kushner? So Hunter Biden has been pardoned by his dad, Joe. Charles Kushner is the father-in-law of Ivanka. He's an ex-convict, dad of Jared, who made a lot of money out of being an advisor to Trump first time round, very close to the Saudis. So which of these do you think is worse? They're both bad, Rory. Which is worse?
So I'm going to really annoy you and most of the audience by saying Hunter Biden's worse.
Oh.
I think it's totally shocking that Joe Biden has pardoned his son. It's unforgivable, and it feels to me corrupt. Charles Kushner at least served time in jail. I think it's ridiculous that Donald Trump is making his daughter's father-in-law the ambassador to France. But I hold Trump to very, very low bars. What Biden's done is just shocking. And to remind listeners, there is no equivalent in Britain. There is a royal pardon, but we use it very, very occasionally to pardon dead people. So Alan Turing was pardoned for being convicted very unfairly for homosexual acts after the Second World War, the great computer genius. The idea of using your position as president to pardon your own son from a criminal offense, I mean, what the hell does that say about the rule of law?
Yeah, I mean, my criticism and my anger over it is more to do with the politics. It won't surprise you to know. Where Joe Biden has a point is when he says that none of the stuff that's really where they've gone after Hunter Biden would have happened had his name not been Biden. I think we can kind of accept that. It has been weaponized, it has been politicized, but that happens in politics.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly. And can I just point out that that's exactly what Trump supporters say. They say none of these cases would have been brought if it wasn't going against Donald Trump. I mean, this is basically saying, both of them are saying the entire US legal system is prone to political bias and they don't trust the rule of law.
Yeah, no, but I think Joe Biden is making a different point about Hunter Biden. He's making the point that had it not been for the Republicans going after Hunter Biden like it was the only thing in town, it would not have become the case that it did. Whereas what Democrats will say about Republicans, rightly, is Donald Trump, you have broken a lot of laws yourself.
No, hold on, no. I mean, sorry, I just to push this too far, but obviously Trump's point is that the case for which he got his 32 felony convictions, I'm perfectly prepared to believe would not have been a priority for prosecutors, that kind of case, if it had not been Donald Trump. And he's probably right that the incredible flurry of cases that have been mounted against Trump reflected a concerted Democrat campaign to try to make him ineligible for office or at least discredit him. And exactly the same is true about Hunter Biden. In both cases, these are people using the law to go after their political opponents. But in both cases, the proper response from the Democrats and Biden is to say, I believe in the rule of rule of law, I believe in just process, and don't go around pardoning your son. My great hero, when I was at school, we read this story about this Russian general called Torquatus. I think it's called Manlius Torquatus.
Oh, I saw your tweet about that. I thought, but life is too short to look it up. But hopefully he'll tell me later.
So his son he'd issued an order to his army that nobody was to engage with the enemy. They weren't to advance. And his son was challenged by an Etruscan to single combat. He went out to fight the Etruscan in single combat, defeated this Etruscan, took his arms, the whole army cheered. he came back to his dad with a big grin on his face and said, "Look what I've done. I've just won this great victory." And his father ordered him to be executed at once.
Ooh. And you admire that?
Yes, and the Romans admired it greatly. It was a story the Romans were told again and again. And of course, the point of the story is that not only are you not supposed to do what Biden does, you're actually supposed to prosecute the law with greater rigor against your own children.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, Donald Trump he's put another father-in-law into another senior job today, Tiffany's father-in-law. So there's a sort of big father-in-law theme going on. Listen, I think the whole pardon thing is utterly ridiculous. There's much vaunted American Constitution. I mean, it's got some pretty ropey bits in it. It really has. And I just think the whole pardon thing is awful. I get why, you wouldn't want to, if you've got that power. Of course, Bill Clinton did the same with his brother. He pardoned his brother over something.
It's
So
shocking. Just in case I sound like I've suddenly weirdly flipped from being Kamala Harris's biggest champion to Trump's, the Charles Kushner case, for which he was sent to jail, was absolutely beyond imagining awful.
yeah,
So Charles Kushner, in court, apologized to his sister, get this, apologized to his sister for soliciting a prostitute, sending the prostitute to her husband, seducing her husband, videotaping the encounter between her husband and the prostitute, and then posting his sister the videotape.
nice guy, nice people.
Because his brother-in-law was planning to testify against him in a federal prosecution.
No, they're lovely people, Roy. They're lovely people. I think the equivalence you make with the Joe Biden family is absolutely so well made. Brackets, I am being very ironic. Olivia Holman, hot off the press. Olaf Scholz has pledged $680 million to Ukraine. Will this be enough to help them win before Trump comes to power in January?
So firstly, no, absolutely not enough to help Ukraine win. I mean, Germany has been very generous, given maybe 15 billion euros. But to put it in context, the US has given north of 120 billion over the last couple of years. And Ukraine is losing ground fast. Russia's made a lot of advances, even over the last 3 days. It seems as though Russia still has a huge superiority in the number of men it's able to deploy. Zelensky has been reluctant to conscript 18 to 30-year-olds at the rate at which we'd expect, and we'll hear a bit more about that in another one of our leading interviews coming up. But it raises the bigger question of whether, if Trump decides to stop the $50 billion a year from the US, whether Europe would want to step up and find that money itself, and finding that money would mean some pretty difficult choices about stopping funding of health, education, infrastructure programs in Europe in order to give money to Ukraine, which it's not currently giving. And secondly, are they going to try for unanimity? So what happens when Viktor Orban from Hungary tries to veto them from doing this stuff? Or are they going to form smaller coalitions? And thirdly, what do they do about the fact that there's still some kit that we don't produce in Europe? It'll be many years before we can. We don't have any real equivalents of the US Patriot missiles, for example. So we'd still have to buy from the US. And this is all about stopping Putin continuing advances. This is not about Zelensky winning, as it were. Anyway, over to you.
Look, the sums of money involved already are enormous. I wonder whether Scholz will get criticised in Germany. I mean, it's always difficult when you're into an election campaign and you start doing these massive spending things, because he's not always been. If you remember, we were very excited at the start of the crisis when Scholz made that speech talking about this being a Satan vendor, complete sort of epochal change in German attitudes and so forth. Yep. And yet he's often given the sense of having to be sort of pushed into things, very, very cautious and so forth. So this is definitely a signal of real support and intent. Whether it's partly with Trump in mind, I just don't know. I had a couple of calls from people in the American system who thought, and maybe one of them said, maybe this is wishful thinking, but it is kind of the developing theme here that he won't just be ready to give over Ukraine. And the point that Trump hates this label of being Putin's little lackey. Now, listen, Rory, there's a question here which I think we should discuss. It's got a link. Philip, with two former Conservative ministers on the Question Time panel last week, is the pretense of BBC neutrality finally dead? Well, let me answer that one, because one of the ministers was Rees-Mogg and the other one was you. So I don't think I really don't think there's a kind of neutrality issue there. But there's another one. Should Question Time be doing longer deep dives with specialised panels for bigger issues like immigration, climate, unemployment, 10 minutes per question never seems to do them justice. Also, is Rory's finger okay? I noticed your finger, Rory. Was that a pen?
Yeah, it's really embarrassing. It was a red
Oh,
pen, and everyone thought I'd sort of scarred my knuckle in some fight with Jacob. Yeah,
but what were you doing? Were you drawing on your finger?
I was trying to take notes with my red pen before question time, which largely involved drawing all over the only space that you can find in the Times newspaper, which is the cartoons section, with the result that I realized that you could see on television that I'd drawn red marker all over
Mm,
Benjamin Netanyahu's face,
I saw
who was
that.
who was the cartoon of the moment. So I thought I was going to get in trouble for that too. Listen, I think I know what your answer would be to deeper dives on immigration, because you said to me when you watched me that that was the most boring question time you'd ever seen in your life. We were trying to do these really sort
I
of
didn't
serious deep
quite say
dives.
that. I didn't quite say that. I did find it quite dull. I think Jacob Rees-Mogg has decided to be even more courteous and polite than ever because he's got this reality TV show coming up. I thought that Mariella Frostrup and Anand Menon were good on immigration. I liked what they had to say on immigration, but they were kind of slightly echoing each other. Do you know what? I thought you couldn't quite decide whether you were on the podcast, talking like you are now, or you were on a kind of cutthroat TV program. And therefore, and you couldn't quite get the balance right.
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, I noticed. So, for example, I try to say something I often say on the podcast, which is we need to be very humane and honest about the immense benefits that immigration bring us, and we also have to demonstrate that we can control the numbers of people coming into Britain.
Very en même temps.
And I realized that, boy, you don't get any applause for that. And when it was put out there, I noticed that on Twitter nobody knew how to respond because the left were really alienated by my talking about controlling immigration, and the right were completely enraged that I said we needed to be humane and accept the contribution that immigrants make. So that's another problem. I think it's just like a huge vacuum if you try to do en même temps.
I don't, yeah, but I also think you had a very flat audience. It was a smaller than usual audience and it seemed very flat.
Well, now, good news, those for the listeners, because it's not going to be flat this week, is it? Because we're going to have Alastair Campbell and none other than our friend Nigel Farage on the same panel.
Yeah. So what's your advice for that one, Rory?
Well, you see, I mean, I'm afraid last time I thought, the answer was to be kind of courteous, sort of do what Jacob Rees-Mogg does, kind of avoid by being very polite.
Yeah, but you don't think I should do that?
But I think you're up for a fight, aren't you? You're going to try to show us what a more entertaining question time looks like.
It kind of depends what comes up. But I don't think I'll let him get away with a lot of his nonsense. And by the way, they've told me that they've I don't know whether this is as a result of yours, but they've told me they've decided to go back to a paddle of 4 this week.
Well, I do think 5 was too many. It's absurd. I don't know why they put 5 on or what they think they're doing there.
If you get a stopwatch, I mean, how many minutes in total do you get on the whole thing? It's not many.
No. You barely speak at all, do you?
So you do all that research on the train on the back of the Times cartoons with your
Exactly,
red pen.
that's right. Yeah. And you get 4 subjects, and you get about 2.5 minutes on each, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Here's a self-serving question for me, Percy. When Rory talked about visiting Afghanistan this summer, sounded like the charities working there are still able to help women and families, despite the international community leaving when the Taliban returned. What can we do to help this work? So, answer on that. Turquoise Mountain, which is the charity that my wife Shoshana runs, is still running in Afghanistan. It's supporting 4,000 female weavers. It's keeping education, health going in a very difficult situation under the Taliban. And this week is an amazing thing called the Big Give, where hundreds of British charities who raise funds will have their funds matched. Turquoise Mountain is an example of that. So would encourage people to look up Turquoise Mountain, the work that it's doing.
Thank you, Percy, for that searing question, which allowed Rory to do, even by his standards, a blatant plug.
Okay, Georgian European integration. Question to you. What do you think about the chance of Georgians to break away from Ivanishvili's autocratic wishes? So remember, Ivanishvili is the oligarch who basically controls Georgian politics, very pro-Putin, against the war in Ukraine. And Elena says, I'm a Russian living here in Tbilisi since March 2022. Young people here really want the Euro integration, but still there are a lot of older people in the country who do not.
Well, I think what's going on in Georgia is really interesting and actually quite inspiring. You've got It's 3 nights on the trot now, thousands of people out on the streets. The latest provocation is the government saying that they're basically stalling on the discussions, the negotiations to get into the European Union. But it's becoming, we talked about proxy activity. There's a proxy element to this as well. The Russians are very much driving the Georgian dream and the Georgian dream government in setting the direction that it's setting. And in addition to Elena, we got some really amazing emails this week from people in Georgia talking about why this matters so much to them. I think they really do have this sense of their country being at an absolute inflection point, and it can go the Russian route or it can go the European route. And it's clear that certainly the people that listen to us, maybe this is obvious, it's clear the direction they want to go in.
Yeah. Quick reminder to everybody. So Georgia, obviously, former part of the Soviet Union. And whereas Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, which were part of the Soviet Union, joined the EU, joined NATO, and in the cases of places like Lithuania, kind of their economies have been completely transformed. They've become liberal democracies. Georgia looked like it might have been on that journey, had one of these color revolutions. There was a huge amount of optimism around a technocratic Georgian government. Got candidate status, so on its route to joining the European Union and on its route to joining NATO. And of course, that is real anathema to Putin. I mean, that's what really frightened him about Ukraine. The idea that NATO could be getting closer, the idea that EU membership could be coming to Ukraine. And so he's really set out to make sure that that future is locked off. How could Europe get Georgia back on track again? Well, the most powerful thing it's got, which no other body in the whole world's got, which makes the European Union completely unique, is it can offer membership. And offering membership means that you can offer people free movement of people, access to single market, enormous amount of money and pre-accession, post-accession funds. America doesn't begin to have power like that. It can't offer those kind of carrots to a country to transform.
Yeah.
But of course, Europe's lost its nerve. So one question I had to you is whether maybe there's a middle ground of whether they could think about offering things like single market membership, which is what they offered to the Scandinavian countries before they joined the full EU, as part of that carrots to places like Georgia or Serbia to begin moving in a better direction.
It's interesting reading Angela Merkel's book, how keen she still is on growing the European Union, continue to give countries in the East hope that they can come in. I think the politics in Europe make it very, very difficult at the moment. So I think you will have to start looking at different kind of options. And I guess this sort of idea of a multi-speed Europe is part of what Macron talked about when he first came in. I saw this wonderful interview with the president of Georgia on one of the French channels. And I thought, my God, she speaks incredible French. So I looked her up. She's French. So it's an amazing, we should get her on because she also speaks fluent English. This is President Zurabishvili, born in Paris, parents Georgian political refugees, became a French diplomat, rose to the level of ambassador, was sent to be ambassador in Georgia, and then with the French government's permission became a Georgian citizen, then joined their diplomatic service, and she's now the president. And she's refusing to go because she says the election that they had recently was not legitimate. They cannot choose who the president is because they're not legitimate. So she's basically staying put while these protests go on. Very brave woman.
The sooner we can get her on, the better. So if our Georgian listeners have access to the president of Georgia.
Yeah. So this one is from somebody called Anna Hack Everding. I usually listen to every episode of your podcast, but I cannot muster the energy since the American elections and the UK press turning on the UK government. Brackets, no government without fail. Give them a break. It's not been that long. What can you say or what can I do to reverse that? The only thing I thought when I read that question is how is she going to know? Because if she's not listening anymore. So if anybody's listening who isn't Anna, but is a friend of Anna, please tell Anna to listen to this bit of the podcast. The short answer is you can't just give up. It is depressing turning on the news every morning. There's bloody Donald Trump appointing, Mickey Mouse to be in charge of transport and Pluto to be in charge of the fight against crime. But, we've got to stay engaged and stay involved.
If only if it was Mickey Mouse and Pluto, tends to be more, I don't know, the Roadrunner in charge of transport and Al Capone in charge of crime. Here's a question from Nick in Tokyo. When you gentlemen refer to someone with a foreign name, it seems to me you both attempt to pronounce it properly. But when referring to the mooch, you both pronounce his first name with a hard T, whereas he pronounced it with a soft th sound. Any reasons why? P.S. Love the show. Actually, I disagree. I say Anthony.
Do you?
Yeah, I say Anthony.
I say Anthony. I mean, as I keep telling Mr. Scaramucci, it is the English language, and Anthony is pronounced Anthony. I'm glad that Nick in Tokyo noticed that we do try. I balls it up on Maccabi Tel Aviv. I think it is important to give it a go, but the truth is, we can't all be polyglots. We can't speak every language in the world. But no, I'm sorry, the mooch is Anthony, as far as I'm concerned. It just sounds weird to me, Anthony. Right, Rory, here's one.
Okay.
Lee Clough, I know both of you support mandatory voting. I want to know if you think MPs should also be subjected to mandatory voting in the House. If we can't abstain, why can they? Good question, that. I support mandatory voting, compulsory voting, but you must have the right to say on the ballot that you choose none of the above. Likewise, I think MPs should be allowed to abstain very, very rarely. What do you think? Did you ever abstain?
I did. I actually abstained on a number of important bills.
Like what?
Well, I think some of them I was traveling abroad as a minister. I mean, part of the problem is that you are registered as abstaining when you're not in the country.
And what about pairing? Weren't you able to pair up?
No, the whips basically destroyed that system when I came in 2010.
Oh.
There's no proper pairing system left. I mean, I think the whips do a pairing. So when I abstain, they probably agree with the Labour whips that someone's abstaining on the other side, but they never tell you who it is.
Oh, I see. But you don't go down as having voted, right?
There's no defined individual. Yeah.
Okay.
I think abstaining's an important option because you're under so much pressure from the whips, and it gives you a chance of registering a protest short of an outright rebellion. And if you took away that option, I think you'd find an even more compliant parliament in an unhelpful way.
Yeah. Well, let me throw this one at you because I know we get questions from email, we get them on social media, we get them sent to the podcast. This one comes from a name we both know, Ragay Omar. I'd like to turn your attention to what's just happened in Somaliland. Somaliland has just held what is deemed a completely free and fair election. First in the world to use biometric voter registration. The incumbent lost and conceded, and there is going to be a peaceful transfer of power on December the 14th. Please tell us why this is significant in relation to the politics of the Horn of Africa.
Well, I think the first thing is that the really central is that, yes, Somaliland is an unusual success story. It's more peaceful, more democratic than other parts of Somalia. But the trick is that answer, than other parts of Somalia.
Yeah.
Somaliland is not recognized by the UK or the US or most countries in the world as an independent state. It sees itself as an independent state, and that goes back to colonial history when it was separate. But in international law, most people see it as part of Somalia, and it wants to gain international recognition. So I have a lot of sympathy for what Raggy says. I've always been really moved and impressed by my visits to Somaliland, and it's an incredible example in a really difficult area of the Horn of Africa, of a country or a province that's really making a go of it. But the problem that Raggy's not pointing to is there's some risks involved. Now, if you are sympathetic to Somaliland, you would say UK and others should recognize it and it'll be fine. But people on the other side will say, no, you are tearing apart one of the most vulnerable countries at one of the big international hotspots of the world. So in Somalia, it's right along the Red Sea, and all these different countries, Ethiopia is trying to get a port by creating deals with Somaliland, but UAE, Turkey, many, many others are trying to get ports dealing with other states, Qatar, backing the government in Mogadishu. So it's a very, very fraught situation. It's on the edge of starvation and has been for the last 7-8 years. It's a conflict almost nobody talks about. It can draw in a lot of proxy actors and neighbors. And that, I guess, is the reason why if you were a risk-averse diplomat in the Foreign Office, despite the amazing achievements of Somaliland, you might suck your teeth about recognizing its independence.
Yeah. Here's one, Rory, from Ed Hillier. What do Alastair and Rory think of Keir Starmer's dismissal of the petition to change the government, saying that is not how our system works? He is, of course, right, but do you think there should have been more engagement with the 2 million people who signed it?
Well, I think you can't ignore 2 million people signing a petition, even if it's been pumped up by Musk, who clearly is now, I mean, just a small digression on this. I mean, it's unbelievable what Musk is doing. He's now deliberately amplifying far right voices from Germany and Austria, and he is determined to troll Keir Starmer. He seems to be completely obsessed with taking down Keir Starmer.
Mm.
So he obviously was involved in promoting this petition, but you can't ignore that number of people. And petitions with far fewer numbers got onto the House of Commons, and we've passed a rule in the House of Commons that petitions that get that numbers get debates. We may have to change that rule, but in the meantime, you've got to take it seriously, whatever your private reservations are.
I don't agree. I actually think I would be very dismissive of this. I mean, it doesn't mean that there aren't people who are very angry with the government. Doesn't mean there aren't people who think that, they want to get rid of the government. But to talk about getting rid of the government a few months after it's been elected on a 3-figure majority, I think it's absurd. And then when you do see that something like 150 countries, people from 150 countries were on this, you realize that it's a sort of tech thing as opposed to a political thing. So I think there's a danger if you say, yes, I'm sure they're, raising legitimate concerns about this, that, and the other. I'd be very dismissive.
Okay, now this is the final one for me, although I might have a light-hearted one at the end, but I think basically the final serious one for me. Barry D. Kelt, how much information would you share with America?
Oh,
If either you the head of Britain's intelligence service, how much highly sensitive information would you be willing to share with your American counterpart if that person was suspected of being very sympathetic to Britain's enemies?
well, interestingly, John Saw's ex-head of MI6, who we interviewed a few months ago, he had a piece in the Financial Times at the weekend, and he had a passing reference to this. The piece was about the challenges that Donald Trump's re-election throws up to the world and to Keir Starmer and what have you. But he mentioned this Tulsi Gabbard, and he asked that question, whether you would feel comfortable sharing all your intelligence when you know that there's somebody there who's broadly sympathetic to your enemies. I think that is a serious question that the agencies will be having to think about. America is clearly the bigger player in all of this, but at the same time, you look at some of the stuff these people put out already and some of the stuff they say. And you were defending Donald Trump over his criminal stuff, right? One of
I
the
think
big
that's a little. I think it's a little bit of spin.
Don't rise to the bait, Rory. You were sort of coming out as Donald Trump's biggest fan when it came to his criminal activities and saying Joe Biden was far worse. Right. But the one that I think is just unforgivable is the stuff about his transportation of classified documents around the place. I mean, you just can't do that when you're in that position.
I'm not going to rise to your bait.
No, fair enough.
Listeners can make up their own mind on the basis of listening to the beginning of today's podcast. But this is a good opportunity, Alistair, to do something that I very rarely do, which is to plug something. And I am plugging The Rest is Classified. And this looks at secret intelligence. And when they get back to the story of the setting up of the CIA, this question of how much information you share was absolutely central because the CIA, quite understandably, thought Britain was completely rife with the kind of people you hate, sort of old school tie, public school boy, nonsense people. And of course, they thought, listen, we can't share too much intelligence with the Brits because it's riddled with Russian spies and this stuff will all get back to Moscow.
Mm.
I also remember having a meeting years ago with the CIA about a particular country in the world where they kept saying to us very charmingly, of course, you know much more about this region than we do, and we're so sorry we can't share any information with you about it because frankly, we don't know anything about it. And then finding out a few months later that the whole country in question was kind of rife with their officers and staff. And so the question of what you share is central. And we have this thing, which you were right at the heart of, called the Five Eyes relationship, where Britain, the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand traditionally share information very, very freely. But even within that, there is a limit. And with your most sensitive agents, you're certainly going to be very, very reluctant to go beyond a need to know basis. You might share the intelligence take, but not the identity of the individual.
I must, you've been plugging so much. I'm going to plug the New European because in my column this week, I've told this very funny story about that Alex Younger told at this event we did together in Oslo. And we were being interviewed by this what I describe as Norway's equivalent of Michael Parkinson, a guy called Frederick Skavlan. But he was talking to Alex about this thing about whether it's true that you can't, if you work as a spy, you can't tell anybody what you do. And Alex Young told this story about when he got married. His then girlfriend, who became his wife, said that one of the conditions for getting married was that she wasn't prepared to live with this nonsense that his own mother didn't know what he did for a living. So she insisted that he tell his mother that he was a spy. So they went and had dinner, whether they sat down and said, Mum, there's something I must tell you. I'm a spy. And his mother said, oh, how marvellous, darling. So was I.
That's very good. It's a great line. That's a great line. Okay, final question for me. Antonio Rodriguez, will you be bringing out a Christmas charity song like Ed Davey? Now, this, for listeners who don't follow the grinding details of the horror of British politics, is the latest massive indignity vested on us by the leader of the Liberal Democratic Party, who decided to appear in a Santa hat, dancing around, as far as I could see, at the bottom of some staircase in somebody's front room. I mean, what on earth? I mean, look, the whole thing was initially justified on the basis that he was going to win elections. And then he said to me it was a brilliant tactic, and look how well they'd done the elections. Indeed, they did do very well in elections. But why is he still rolling on this?
Rory, I'm going to read out to you a message from sources close to Ed Davey.
Yes.
Hi, Alastair. Happened to notice that your Restes brother-in-arms has been having a go at our campaign style again. Thought you might be interested to know that our slightly weird TikToks have all been in aid of the Carers Trust. And we've released a Christmas single with a choir of young carers, all for a good cause. So I just think you should lighten up, Rory. He cares about the issue. He's raising money for carers charities.
And how's it going? Has it become a top single? Has he made it to the top?
I don't think so. But we should probably, we should, that stuff we did at the O2, we should maybe set it to music and put it out as a Christmas single. What do you think?
What, like an agreeing disagreeably signal?
Welcome to the rest. I think getting the phrase "agree disagreeably" in a hit song, that is my ambition for 2025.
Lovely, thank you. So that's a good end to the podcast. Thank you very much.
Jolly good. See you soon.
Bye bye.